So lecture exam 4, physiology, lecture on the pituitary gland and what is released. The hypothalamus exerts control in a lot of ways over the pituitary. Pituitary gland is also called the hypophysis, and it has an anterior part and a posterior part. The anterior part is also called the adenohypophysis. Think A for anterior, A for adeno. And the posterior part is also called the neurohypophysis. And one way that you can remember that is that the neurohypophysis is composed of a lot of nerve endings that come from the hypothalamus. This is actual nerve endings is what this is. Whereas the adenohypophysis doesn't have the nerve endings in it. Instead, the nerve endings end above it, into the blood supply above it, and then it goes down into it. So it's different. The things that are released here from the hypothalamus exert control over the anterior pituitary. And they are, some of them are excitatory or stimulatory, and other ones are inhibitory. The ones that are stimulatory are thyroid releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone. Sorry, the first one was thyrotropic releasing hormone, excuse me. Corticotropic releasing hormone and growth hormone releasing hormone. And all those exert a stimulatory effect on all the things that are mentioned in them. Go over this a little bit more later. The ones that are inhibitory are somatostatin, which has a inhibitory effect on growth hormone, prolactin inhibiting hormone, also known as dopamine, and it obviously has its effect over here, and gonadotropin inhibiting hormone, which has its effect down here, opposite of gonadotropin releasing hormone. So each one of these little peptides are released in here. Remember, peptides don't last very long in circulation. They'll disappear within sometimes less than a minute, up to maybe just a few minutes. So they're released here in this blood supply, and they travel down into here, and then where they come out and they stimulate these cells, and these different cells release these different hormones: growth hormone, prolactin, adrenocorticotropic hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone. And all of these they come in here, go into the blood supply, and then travel to their respective organs where they're going to have their effect. This is different. This happens in the anterior or the adenohypophysis. This is different from the neurohypophysis. There isn't any little messenger from the hypothalamus to here. It literally is just the hypothalamus directly releasing the vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone and the oxytocin. These are directly released from the hypothalamus through these nerve endings, which end in the neurohypophysis. The neurohypophysis is literally made up of nerve endings from the hypothalamus, whereas this is not. This is a secondary message system. So let's talk a little bit about some of these. Growth hormone. These are all the anterior, and these are all the posterior. This is the adenohypophysis. This is the neurohypophysis. So the growth hormone, it is inhibited by somatostatin, and it is stimulated by growth hormone releasing hormone, both controlled by the hypothalamus. Actually, before I go on, I probably should mention there's also signals sent essentially from the anterior pituitary back up to the hypothalamus that control things like for internal homeostasis, the limbic system, which is like fear, other incredibly large emotions, whatever, as well as the circadian rhythms and olfactory sensations. So there's some give and take here. Anyway, going back, growth hormone, somatostatin, and growth releasing hormone. This determines like bone density or growth, but also just body growth in general, as well as lipid and carbohydrate metabolism. Prolactin, which is inhibited by prolactin inhibiting hormone, or dopamine, is going to be what stimulates milk production in the breast. And the adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, is stimulated by corticotropic releasing hormone to release to basically release this ACTH, which goes down into the adrenal gland, and then in the cortex of the adrenal gland, which last time I goofed up on this, but the cortex is the outside, releases glucocorticoids, which is like a steroid. And those glucocorticoids go and have their effect. I believe this is also where, in the adrenal glands, is where epinephrine and those sort of things are, like adrenaline kind of things. Think of that. So the thyroid stimulating hormone, this is stimulated by thyrotropic releasing hormone, which I forgot to put on there. Thyrotropic releasing hormone, that is stimulatory for this to release that. And then there's the gonadotropin releasing hormone, which stimulates the luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone, and it's inhibited by gonadotropin inhibiting hormone. And that controls, these two control basically the follicles for the women when they're ovulating and all that, and for the men, the testes, this process of spermatogenesis. And then going over here, for the posterior, remember these don't have that in-between step that this one has. This is just the nerve ending straight off the hypothalamus. This releases vasopressin, which is antidiuretic hormone, which goes to the kidneys and basically maintains the homeostasis of water in our circulation to help us not to have hypertension or hypotension. It also releases oxytocin, which in the case of females who are pregnant has a contractile effect on the uterus, as well as on the milk-containing organs within the breast, to cause the breast to release milk and the uterus to clamp down to push out the baby. And that is that lecture.